Welcome to Franklin Covey's C-Suite Conversations. I'm your host, Patrick Ledden, and each week I have the honor of sitting down and talking to a top leader to explore how they navigate disruption, build culture, and lead with purpose. Today, I'm joined for just one of those type of conversations by Kathleen Weslock, who has served in numerous leadership roles, including both Vice President and Chief Human Resource Officer, and now is a Senior Advisor with Synopsys. With more than 3 decades of experience spanning industries and continents, Kathleen has helped organizations transform, scale, thrive, and even deal with acquisition. She has been recognized by HRO Today for her longtime commitment to leadership, culture, and the people side of business. In our conversation, we're going to talk about her journey and the lessons she's learned along the way. So with all that said, Kathleen, welcome to C-Suite Conversations.
Thank you, Patrick. Happy to be here.
I am so happy to have you here today. You and I had a chance to chat before we got started. I just know the audience is going to so enjoy learning from you. If you wouldn't mind, would you tell just a little bit about your career? I know you've been in various industries and roles. If you could tell a little bit about your journey, that'd be wonderful.
So, I did not come out of the womb wanting to be in HR. It just kind of happened. And I don't think that would happen in today's world. I think you have to be a lot more thoughtful and guided. But again, I was at college, major in Spanish and psychology. My first job out of college was as a telephone receptionist at the Pan American Health Organization because I spoke Spanish fluently, and I was bucked upstairs to the employee relations department. And that's how I started in HR, not because of my knowledge, but because of my language abilities. From there, I went to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and started leading training programs. And I met a group of mentors who really helped set my career going forward. This is at a time that there were very few women in labor relations. And I had designed a course for executives, labor relation executives, how to lobby Washington. Very appropriate for today's world, for sure, how to maneuver in Washington, D.C. And at the end of the conference, these senior executives who represented Texaco, U.S. Steel, Bethlehem Steel, I mean, they were the cream of the cream in labor relations. They really helped me set my career, encouraged me to go to graduate school, encouraged me to work for the National Labor Relations Board, and gave me, internships and jobs along the way. And so that's really how I started my career.
We often hear people talk about others who have mentored them or coached them along the way, given them some advice, spent some time with them, and how helpful that is. But I know there's people, I guess on both sides of the equation, we could talk about it today. There's some people who are saying, I hear it all the time that I should have a mentor or I should look for some people to give me advice, but I'm kind of early off in my career and I don't know how to even start to form those relationships. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And then we'll go the other side. If you're more senior and you're in those conferences and you see somebody, what might you do to help help them along the way? So let's start with the first part.
Sure. So when early in career folks come to me and say, will you mentor me? I say, I can give you advice. I can't mentor you because I only have so much time on my hand. I need to focus on the people who work with me or for me. And so I tend to work with that group at work. And again, my company ANSYS was just acquired by Synopsys. So at ANSYS, I always had certain of my executives, particularly my high potential leaders in HR, who I took a particular interest in. They tended to be more earlier in career. And so how I helped them was to guide them, give them stretch assignments, have them do things that I couldn't do that they would never expect to do. One example is I had to speak at a very large conference. It was a keynote address for a well-known HR firm. And at the last minute, I couldn't make it. So rather than just say, no, ANSYS is not going to participate, I had one of my team members join. And it was a game-changing experience for her. But it was also, good for us because we still had our name on the days. So that's how I tend to help early in career. It can't be all about you. It has to be a two-way street. Now, when I think about more senior level executives, before this, we had the conversation, Patrick, I decided to count up how many CHROs I've helped. There's more than 18 that I have worked with. Currently, 18 sitting CHROs who somewhere along the way worked for me, had the duress or privilege of working alongside with me. And I like to think that I helped them either through what I did or through my mistakes, that they learned how to be a better CHRO. And that's what I think my calling truly is, to really help the next generation of HR leaders. Because while everything has changed and life is so tumultuous, nothing has really changed for the head of HR executive. It's just more and more and more.
Yeah, that's so true. It does seem like it's more and more and more. And you mentioned not having the time necessarily. I love how you phrase that, because not having the time necessarily to mentor all these people, even if they come to you, is a really critical thing. Because I think when somebody's asking for a mentor or for somebody to provide them some advice and counsel, they don't necessarily realize not just the time it takes, but kind of the gray matter that needs to be employed to do it well.
Well, that's right. I mean, to me, a simple conversation is more a coaching session, and I do that. I just finished my getting my LCOP from Rutgers University in Hydra to become a better executive coach. But I will have conversations with people. But mentoring to me is something that I take very seriously. It is not only mentoring them when people are in the room, but it's being their sponsor when people leave the room or when they leave the room. It's really making sure that I'm there to help the individual, to be their sponsor. To me, that's more important than mentorship. Mentorship is a two-way street. Let's talk about things. But a sponsor is super invested and will say things to other people when you're not in the room. That's really important and critical.
No, it really is, because there's a lot of decisions about your career, my career, that are made when we're not in the room.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You talked about mentoring or working with various leaders in the HR field over the course of your career. And you mentioned 18 specifically, kind of the most senior of positions. When you think about some of you said it's like things are changing, but there's also more and more of the same. It's just kind of faster. Do you see that there's particular things that like HR leaders need to do more effectively in the coming years?
Yeah, I do, Patrick, and I'm really passionate about this. I think we have worked so hard to get a seat at the table that we have often forgotten the basics. So I'm a big believer in, you got to know your trade.
Mm.
And as an HR executive, you had to understand the subject matter expertise and all the areas that you're responsible for. And when you think about it, that's why HR is such a fascinating career, the plethora of skills that you need to have. You need to be a labor lawyer, an employment lawyer, a compensation expert, a financial analyst, a labor economist. You need to be a psychologist, sometimes a psychiatrist without a license. You need to be a mediator. You need to be a conciliator. And you also need to be able to make the really hard decisions. So within that area, there's a lot of really deep subject matter expertise that's not only grounded in the law, but also in best HR practices. So I'm rabid that in order to be in this seat or any senior seat in HR, you have to be well grounded. And I do think, particularly during the tech boom, we put a lot of people in these roles who may have one sweet spot, perhaps recruiting, talent acquisition, or maybe compensation. And so these are the executives that I am most interested in coaching and mentoring to help them get the full suite of HR skills that are needed.
When you think about that full suite, as people are working their way up, maybe from being more a specific functional area within the HR space, and they're kind of working their way through their careers and broadening that skill set, do you find that there's certain ones that they struggle with generally most, or maybe are most important when they kind of get to the top?
Well, Patrick, there's a lot written about this, and it's called the paradox of HR, because when you go into HR, it's not like you go to business school, you want to be an analyst. You get into HR because you truly do want to help people, right? And so there's been studies done about why do HR folks end up in HR. And it really starts with that soft, wanting to help an organization, wanting to help people, more the psychological, emotional quotient side of HR. Well, when you get into the seat, what really matters is what your CEO wants and what your shareholder wants. And that is driving the business, OKRs, financial matters, financial acumen. And so what I see is a lot of HR executives struggle with that financial piece. So the way that I solved this early in my career was, first I was a management consultant at Mercer for many years. And you had to, build your own business, run your own P&L. I worked all with actuaries, so, I couldn't have a conversation without being grounded in the numbers. And I started my career in compensation and benefits, and then I went into global. And so with that compensation background, you have to get into the numbers pretty quickly. And I do find coming up through compensation, labor relations. I always try to focus on the hard side of HR. So I was super close at all times to the business. In today's world, talent acquisition has been the ticket to the top seat because the war for talent, the way that we need to bring in people, et cetera, et cetera. And so the executives who come in that way really have to get grounded in what I call the right side of HR, which is the comp and benefits, the labor economics, data analytics, and what are the triggers that move an organization, in my mind, is absolutely critical in today's workplace.
So it sounds like there's some times where, as an HR professional, you would imagine you run into people that they don't have the financial acumen necessarily. So it's like, okay, there's no better time than today to start building that. And maybe that means maybe that's something formal in schooling or something like that. But it also could just be being more proactive in conversations, getting more engaged in the business type of discussions.
Totally. So I had with my CFO, I would listen to meetings, hear it, and then we agreed to mentor each other, and she would answer my questions behind the scenes, so the rest of my colleagues didn't realize the questions I was asking. It was a very safe space for me. But she and other CFOs that I've worked with, we form a bond where we truly are one team and help each other. I help them with notifying the talent acquisition issues, like if we're getting ahead of plan on hiring, if we're ahead on budget, if we funded the bonus the right way. And I learned the financials of the business through my CFOs. And I've been very fortunate to have worked with some really world-class CFOs.
As you were going through that, I was just thinking about, you ticked off a number of things that people in the HR space need to be able to do as they work their way through their careers. And I would imagine people listening right now are going, oh, I'm pretty good at that. I'm not too strong at that, but I've got my go-to person for that within my own team. Well, one question there could be, well, that person might leave. So what are you going to do then? So you got to be continuing to work on your own skills. But then you talked about your CEO and your CFO relationships you've had over the years, which got me thinking to the idea of, okay, what have you found as a HR professional has been helpful for you, maybe including the CFO relationship and others, to help you be successful in your role? What have other C-suite members brought to the conversation?
I think it's really understanding what they expect out of HR. If you ask any executive what they expect out of HR, forget what they write on the job description. But when you're interviewing, say, and what are your expectations out of HR? It will range along the way from, we want you to be our eyes and ears in the organization. We want you to run a great comp process. We want you to be the head of talent acquisition. We want you to win awards for us. Unlike certain professions, people all have a very different view of HR. And so you've got to figure out what is it that organization wants of you to make sure that you're going to fit in. I remember interviewing for one job, and the CEO, I said to him, what are your expectations for your HR? And, rightly or wrongly, he said, I want people to be afraid of you. And I said, well, then I'm your wrong person, because that's not me. I'm a business partner. I'm going to be that striking the right balance between what are the shareholder interests, what do you want me to accomplish, and also being that employee advocate. I think in today's world, HR executives get a hit for not being close enough to the people and being an advocate for employees. And I take that role very strongly. And it is striking the right balance, because it is attention. But it's attention that I think is critical, and you have to get that right to really be successful in this role.
Yeah, it seems like so many leadership roles, regardless of function, there's the tensions that you're constantly navigating, right? Between do I lean in? Do I pull back? Do I kind of take a task over? Do I let my people handle it? I mean, what do I take a risk? Do I not take a risk? There's always these tensions that we have to learn to navigate. How do you kind of yourself navigate the tensions?
It's constant kind of, going between the flow and reading the tea leaves and talking to colleagues and saying, how did I do? I mean, there's times where I haven't gotten it right. And so you have to course correct. It's also going back to your CEO or your executive team saying, how am I doing? Did I get that right? Am I doing everything that you want me to do? And so I really think in striking that right balance, you have to have the wherewithal and the strength and the fortitude to know to where you're going. But you also have to have the humility and the emotional intelligence to know when you need to course correct. So when I think about the situations where I've been the most successful. And it really is kind of a formula. It's number one is speaking the CEO language, right? What does your CEO want you to do? And he or she may be very specific. But then it's putting that HR lens behind it and really understanding it. I'll give you an example. There was one case where I had, I wasn't, the CEO and I were, going in different directions. I didn't understand him. He didn't understand me. So I called a prior CEO I had worked with along the years and just said, hey, I need your advice and counsel. We seem to be speaking different languages. What am I doing right or what am I doing wrong? And so he helped me course correct right then and there. He said, you are not speaking the language he wants you to speak. So let's go through how, instead of talking about what you're talking about, all your HR interventions, let's talk the language that he wants you to speak. And so after that course correction, it was great. It was a much better relationship, much more of a strategic partner. I was able to be direct and concise with the individual. And really, we built a lot more trust and confidence once we had that level setting. So I think it's always important to say, you think you're okay. Not everybody is always honest with you, but you have to have that humility to go back. Do remember the two loneliest positions in any organization are first the CEO and then this role, the CHRO, because you really have no one to talk to. And it's no wonder that the average tenure of an HR executive is about 3 years. It's a position that's fraught with peril because either you're too much on one side, too much on the other side, you're missing cues. And it's a fabulous role, but it's really something that requires a lot of headspace.
I would imagine it takes a lot of emotional capital too, emotional labor to do that type of role.
Totally. And as you go through a acquisition or merger, which is what we just did with Synopsys acquiring Ansys, we spent a year and a half focusing on the emotional component, not only all the different levers that we had to pull to make sure the acquisition was a success, and it's been a resounding success, but how do we build resilience and focus on the emotional quotient of all employees going through any type of change.
Well, I definitely want to talk to you about the acquisition because I know there's a lot of people listening who are maybe experiencing that, dabbling in, hearing it might be happening to them. But before we do that, I just want to stay here for just a second because you were talking about kind of having the strength and the resolve in certain times, and when you maybe fall down a bit, figuring out how do I pivot, what do I do to adjust, and that's can be hard to do in a high visibility. I can't miss out, and if you're watching it, you can see that looks like there's a saddle behind you. And
yes.
The analogy often is you fall off a horse, you've got to get back on that horse. And I'm just thinking about what have you done, maybe as you're riding a horse or in your work to realize you've got to get back in that saddle.
It's giving yourself grace to be able to think about it. It's instead of getting right to your emails first thing in the morning, taking the time to build that mindfulness and that space to think. The one thing about riding to be successful, and you're right, I used to ride a lot. I had a traumatic accident, so I haven't ridden, but I'm riding today. I'm getting back in the saddle. And what you have to do to be a good rider is one, sit firmly in the saddle, have your legs long against the horse, have your right position, and just be grounded. If you are not grounded in the saddle, you're going to fall off. And I've had enough trainers over the year who would say to me, well, Kathleen, you must have had a bad week at work because you are all over in that saddle. If you don't settle down and just find your center, you're going to fall. So it's really finding your center. And then when it gets crazy and frenetic, the one thing you learn, because it's not just you, it's a horse, right? And these animals weigh 1,800 pounds and they can have a mind of their own. So you've got to be calm in order to lead them forward. And when they're flipping out and doing something that you may not want them to do, it's up to you to be calm and to just take one step forward, get them grounded, take one step forward, take another step. And then when you realize that you're back talking to each other and you're one team again, that's when you can really move forward. So that's why I love mucking stalls. I love riding horses. I love gardening because it really helps you get dirty, get grounded, and think about what is the end goal. What are you really trying to do?
I've owned a few horses over the years, so I have some familiarity with them, and there is definitely something about the presence that you bring to. I guess as a leader, there's presence you bring to an organization or to a meeting or to a situation. But the same thing is kind of with the horse. They can pick up on the signals you're sending. If you seem a little bit kind of off, not centered,
Yeah.
they feel that literally.
That's right. And you make them skittish. If you're skittish, they're skittish. So it's really having that space and the support around you, having a group of trusted advisors, not necessarily the people who work for you or who may be within your organization, but people who you can rely on throughout the years, who you can just pick up the phone and say, help me with this, or that you're available to them. And so I've been very, very fortunate through my career to have a network of either HR executives or other executives or people who are in different functions who I can just pick up the phone and say, help me think through this a little bit. And that's critical.
Well, congratulations on getting back in the saddle. And I hope you have a long and wonderful ride today. Speaking of long and wonderful rides, how's this for a transition? Speaking of long and wonderful rides, the acquisition you just went through, that was quite a ride. Tell us a little bit about that. How long did it take to kind of come into being? And also just, you mentioned the emotional component to it, but I'd just love to hear from your perspective, if you don't mind just riffing a little bit, like telling us about it, what you learned along the way and how it was so successful. Because oftentimes we read in textbooks, the ones that don't go too well.
Yeah. No. And we were laser focused on making this successful. It was important as a company to our shareholders, but more importantly to employees on both sides. So I joined ANSYS in the summer of 2004, so July-ish. By October, my CEO told me we were about to be acquired. So our plans of, what we were going to do to getting ready for the acquisition really changed on a dime. So we had a very planned approach. We were very thoughtful. We said, here's what we can focus on. Here's the task ahead of us. And this is all we can do. There's no shiny, dimes or any shiny things that we'd like to focus on HR. We had an entire plan of, AI readiness for the organization. We had to say, we've got to put that, a little bit on the back burner for right now, because what we need to do is to focus on making this acquisition a success. And so we really looked at what was the most important. We didn't want to boil the ocean. We said, what as an HR team do we need to focus on? And it was really getting the buy-in from not only our senior leadership team, but our board of directors, and also letting our employees know what we could do and what we couldn't do. So the first matter at hand was really keeping our employees engaged and retained. And not only all employees, but our key talent. So we spent a lot of time identifying key talent, critical roles. Every organization has those individuals who are the only ones who know how to do what they do. And if they were to leave, they can cause a lot of harm to the organization. And it's not just your C-suite executives. It might be the person who knows where the light switch is in your NOC, or, who can run the power for your systems. So we went through a very involved exercise of identifying what those skills were, who the people were, and making sure that they were firmly grounded in their saddle. And then it was really to, keep the culture going. ANSYS, like Synopsys, has a very strong culture, and both organizations, and now Synopsys, is continuing to win many awards for their proactive communication. And so we did a lot of training, a lot of development, talking about our culture, how you need to get ready, building resilience, helping our leaders focus more on their employees. So we did over, I want to say over 1,000 focus groups, and roundtables and learning with our employees to make sure that they, stayed focused. And not only that, that our leaders felt equipped to going through this serious, acquisition. So we had a very robust listening strategy. We expanded upon that. We had stay conversations. We taught our leaders how to have stay conversations. We had retention plans. We also developed a leadership playbook as to how to manage through resilience and change, and brought about a change leadership capability that we hadn't had as pronounced until we went through this. So there was a lot. The leadership and development team and our employee engagement team were simply amazing during this time of transition. And we also focused on our employees, individual career plans, making sure people all knew that they had a path forward at the current organization as well as within the new organization. And so that led us with success, but we continue to monitor it. We looked at KPIs every month. I had a dashboard that would say how many people have left, how many people have individual career plans, how many people are a little bit loose in the saddle. So it was really staying proactive on where our employees were thinking as we went through the change. So it was a massive effort. The other part too was, and you and I just talked about this, the emotional part. We really focused a lot on making sure people were ready, because during any change, you're going to have good days and you're going to have bad days. So it's, again, keeping people grounded and centered in that saddle at work so they can just focus on what they need to do. So we use some outside resources. My team developed a phenomenal training program, leadership development, that we took throughout the organization that I think really served us well.
Well, I love how, as you're talking about it, you talked about some activities, many of the activities, and obviously the communication piece was a huge component to it, but the number of meetings you had and the career development planning that you were doing, but then also kind of, you mentioned earlier about the business component. We're speaking to specific KPIs. If the headlines were to be written today, Kathleen, what would you say about if the KPIs were to be put in headlines, what would they be saying about how that transition went?
I'd say that at the same time that we were going through an acquisition, we were able to increase headcount significantly and bring people into the organization. Over 2 years, we brought in approximately 900 new employees. Our employee engagement scores didn't falter. They continued to be in the 80%, if not better. Our current employees, our retention rate was below industry averages. In tech, you may have retention rates at double digits. We had less than 7%, and it was under 2% for what we call regrettable attrition. So, and again, we looked on how many hours are we giving our leaders learning and development, how many individuals have career plans and are making progress. So it was really working with the data analytics team to make sure that every one of our leaders had a dashboard of the key HR metrics so they could track how their organizations were doing.
That's so useful, and thanks for sharing. I'm curious for you personally, like what was the biggest challenge of all of it?
The biggest challenge of all of it is because we kept wanting to do more, and we knew we couldn't. We couldn't boil the ocean, and we had to get this to a certain point over the finish line. So it wasn't hard for me. It was just what could be or what could have been. And, Jill Larson, who's the head of HR at Synopsys, I know her well. We've worked together, over 20 years together in different capacities, and she's very capable. So my goal was to give her an HR organization, an HR team that was just ready to go, was world class, and for her to now expand and build upon that in the new organization, because it's going to be a terrific company.
It's always the challenge, isn't it, as a senior leader, or any person perhaps, is to realize there's all the stuff you want to do. And then the reality, I think the more effective people and successful people are the ones who go, okay, I can't do it all. So what truly matters most, and kind of taking that extra step to figure that stuff out really matters. Because I would imagine even leading up to the announcement to you of the acquisition happening, you probably had some other plans that you wanted to work on. And then it's like, okay, those are going to be shelved now because I've got to focus on this.
Well, that's right. And again, you have a thing called HR interim operating covenants. And so this is how you have to operate your HR team, how you have to operate HR. And it includes a host of things, from compensation, how much you can spend, what your equity pools look like. So it was heavy duty working with my head of compensation and our lawyers to hash out what those IOCs were going to look like as we move forward. And also to make sure that during the acquisition process, that there were no footfalls, that we didn't cross or break an IOC. So we were super diligent at all times. I had them actually posted on a board behind my desk in another office to make sure that whenever we took an action, we were following the letter of the law on the IOCs.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, it's a smart thing to make sure you're not going to blow anything up in the process of doing it.
No.
So One thing I love about this conversation is you've had different roles. You said you didn't grow up in HR. You kind of worked your way into it, and then you realized the things that you need to work on as far as financial acumen and other things. We just covered a whole bunch of different things that are so informative, and I don't want to call them things because they're more than things. They're insights, ideas, kind of things that people can put into practice. There's that word, thanks again. But as we wrap up, the question I wanted to ask you is, we have a range of people listening to the podcast today. Some people are in the C-suite. Some people are maybe just taking on their first job out of school or how they ever stepped into the workforce, however that ended up being. What idea or suggestion might you have to all of them to say, regardless of where you are in your career, regardless of where you're hoping to go in your career, whatever it might be, here's just one thing that Kathleen has found to be a really useful piece of advice?
Yeah. I don't know if I just have one, Patrick.
All right, I'll limit you to a couple. Huh? Hey, you said we got to narrow our focus, so I'll limit you to a couple, okay? Okay.
I think the first is to listen. This isn't about you, it's about the organization. So really hear what people are saying to you and test that. And this, executive coaching course that I just took, we had a whole session on critical listening, deep listening. And boy, can all of us go back and learn how to re-listen and how to ask those critical questions, kind of like what you're doing to me right now, Patrick. You're really keeping me on my toes by asking me really thoughtful, critical questions. So that's number one. Number two is there's always a playbook for what you have to do. And so you got to know the playbook. You got to know your skills. But at some point, particularly at the C level, you got to take the playbook, memorize it, and then rip it up and make it your own. So that's the other thing I tell people is don't just, even the law, we have a statement stare decisis. Even the, Supreme Court every once in a while will, deviate and do something different. We need to do that too. And the last thing is HR and, any C-suite position is a team sport. So really make sure you're focused on the team and not necessarily just what you want. And, with age comes wisdom. And I find that I'm a better executive now because of the wisdom that I have garnered over the years. I have the lashes on my back from the mistakes I've made. And you will make mistakes, but it's how you recover from those mistakes, the resilience that you bring to the table, and how you move on that sets you up for success.
Well, I'll tell you what set us up for success, inviting you on the podcast. And I thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights. As I said, I wish you just the best on your ride today and all your future rides. And for folks listening, I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Kathleen Weslock. I think her insights on leadership, culture, and transformation, but specifically on the ability to listen, the ability to understand a playbook and know when to throw the rules out sometimes and write some new ones, and also the recognition that we're all on a team. Life is a team sport. If you found today's episode valuable, please follow C-Suite Conversations and share it with colleagues or friends who would benefit from insights like the ones Kathleen shared with us today. You can also explore more leadership resources at franklincovey.com. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And until next time, I'm Dr. Patrick Ledden. Now go make it a great day.